everybody, and welcome to the DM's Book Club, your favorite place for random ramblings about D&D and all of its books. I'm Ryan. I'm ready to go, and I've got Fiona here, who also I think is ready to go, although I am putting words in your mouth.
Yes, no, I'm ready to go. I'm excited. It's now. Why can't I just say I'm excited and you laugh? It's like, no, it's my excited face.
The phrase "I'm excited" that just anybody who says it immediately doesn't seem excited. Like it's one of those. I can't remember what the name of the phrase is, but it instantly gives you the opposite reaction. I am so ready for this. Yeah, really. I think it's because we're British, so anything we say is dripping in sarcasm.
It's already sarcastic. Yeah, it's like no, it's fine. And you go, oh, but there's layers and there's trauma all in the history in that word fine. Trying to work out what it is.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like having a conversation with somebody from Britain where they say it's fine. I don't want to talk about it anymore. And you're like, it's not fine. And they do want to talk about it. Is that, I don't know.
Yeah. But it's like, again, I've told the story so many times, but when I was over in the US with my partner's friends, they'll say something to me and I'll say something back, and there'll be a moment where they're like, yes. And I'm like, have you heard me? Or do you think I've been really sarcastic and you're not sure if it's an insult or not? And so every time I always lose my self-confidence, because I'm like, everything I say, it has to go through several different filters to get to them. And it's like, oh, God's sake, just treat me like a normal person.
I mean, there is that, the stereotypical joke that Americans don't get sarcasm. And I don't know if that's necessarily true. I think sarcasm is something that is widespread around the world. But I think what people don't realize is that in Britain, sarcasm may be up to 50% of our humor. Like we are dripping in the stuff, and everything we say is full of sarcasm all the time. That's just how we are. Everything is fake negative and really pessimistic, and just isn't this wonderful? Yay, it's raining again. I'm so excited.
There's a TV show from Apple TV called Ted Lasso, which I've watched, and it's about the premise is a middle of the field American football coach has been acquired to come over and teach Premier League football. It is such an accurate representation of how a Midwest American comes over who's super lovely, and people are just like, "Oh, you're shit, aren't you?" And they're like, "Wow, that I don't think you mean that. That was a not nice thing to say." And it's like it's very accurate about the British portrayal, but also for me, it feels very close to home. So I've definitely met those people who are very lovely. It's that sort of weird translation thing. You're like, "You're too nice. There must be a reason. There must be a secret." No, you're just really nice. I don't know how to deal with that as an English person.
Sincerity. Oh no, it's my foil. I
highly recommend it. It's like 8 episodes long. I'm not into football of the American or the British variety at all, but it is fascinating to watch because obviously it's just the way it's put, and it's filmed somewhere near London as well, like a big stadium and stuff. So yeah, really worth it.
Amazing. Now that we've had that fantastic introduction, let's jump into some actual D&D. So what are we talking about today?
Right. Okay. So I always have to start this with a preface. I don't understand why people would play races outside of the main 4. So you've got your humans, your dwarves, your elves, and your halflings. And I
love that as a statement. Sorry, that is fantastic.
I've got to grab you at the beginning. That's what I've decided. You've got to grab them in. What I've realized, obviously, over the last couple of years is that it's not other people's fault that I think like this. It's my fault I think like this. And because from the player's handbook, there's a lot of assumptions made about certain races, that, well, these races are typically evil and these ones are typically good and these ones are on the fringes of society and these ones are not. And since we always talk about Tasha's, the great change, it's like, you don't have to be like this. And I was thinking about it to myself, and I was thinking, why do I struggle with certain people picking certain races over and over again to play? And I realized it's because of the way they're written about in the player's handbook. And so today I want to talk about Tieflings and sort of their counterpart of Aasimars. I'm going to say Aasimars, even though the Americans call it Aasimars. I can't take it seriously if they call them Aasimars.
No.
Yes.
No, I totally agree.
Yeah, so obviously Tieflings is one of the main races, playable races that you have in the player's handbook, and Aasimars were originally a sort of suggestion race in the DM's guide, but now is in Volo's Guide to Monsters as a playable race. And I thought this would be quite interesting because both of them are, I would say, are like the opposites of a coin. Like one of them has stereotypically been very, very evil and used as sort of nefarious, as a mistrust about them, and the others are seen as heroically good, will fight the evil, etc. So you think, oh, this would be perfect to set up as a balance, as a sort of a relationship between them, which sort of, I guess, echoes in obviously the fights between demons, devils, and angels for higher up, but it puts it down onto player form. So I just thought it'd be interesting just to look at it and see, like, I guess for me, question why people would like to play these races, and can we get away from this sort of stereotypical, well, you're a tiefling, you must be evil, or you're an Aasimar, you must be good. I think that's sort of the aim of this episode.
No, I like it. As I say, the player's handbook was written years ago now in a way, in a world that is slightly different to the one that we are currently residing in. And certainly D&D has evolved a lot over the last couple of years, especially in terms of how people are viewing choice and characters and backgrounds, and a lot of the flexibility and character creation that comes with that. So definitely it's quite entertaining to go back and have a look at some of the older stuff and see what context that now can be read in and what you might be able to do to tweak it. Should we dive into Tieflings first?
Let's dive into Tieflings first. So Tieflings, again, everyone has the image of them because they've got a huge picture in the player's handbook. Obviously, this is page 42 to 43 in the player's handbook, and anywhere on D&D Beyond, you have this image of a tiefling, in robes, horns, purple, has a tail, and it talks about them first off as devil children, which is not a great phrase, I would say, but it's supposed to instill that fear. And I think what I like about D&D is that the way it tells stories, it says, like, these are generations passed down, there are mistrusts, there are biases, there are cultural things to each thing, and what it is for every culture in the Forgotten Realms, according to the player's handbook, is that tieflings are bad. They are, you do not trust them, because way back when, they're sort of the creation, or how they came to be, is that there was a pact with Asmodeus, so the Lord of the Nine Hells. And as a result of this pact, or as a result of this one thing, they are paying, all these tieflings are paying back for what happened in this pact. So it's not only that those tieflings at the time, but it's their children, and it's gone on for generations, that they're holding this sort of trauma. They are greeted with stares and whispers wherever they go, and to the point where they suffer violence and insult, which I think is something I'd want to talk about in a little bit. But it's just because this one thing that they did has now sort of marred the rest of this race. And I found it fascinating, again, going from the player's handbook, it's written as these are evil races. These feel like there's no redeeming features for them as a race. So in my head, back at the time, I was like, well, why would you want to play this? Why would you want, unless you were like, okay, we're going to play the anti-hero campaign, or I want to play someone that's not like that. Why were so many people playing tieflings? And as I sort of read sort of this and thinking about what Tasha says, is like, well, obviously we can't blame people now for things that have happened, has come before, that other people did. And I think what I'd hope, and I know we've said this before, is that I hope in the, when they revise this, or when we ever move to a new edition, that stuff like this is taken out. Like it's an example of something that happened, but it doesn't apply to one race or one heritage. It can apply to any heritage if they want to play that. And it's about, to me, setting that expectations, I guess, with setting expectations with alignment. Like, we've had this conversation, actually, we're talking about Curse of Strahd. I have one of the players asking me, like, well, what if I want to play an evil character? And I was like, well, that's fine, but are you using that as your motivation for everything? Or is it like you're doing it per action? Whenever you get a choice, are you constantly taking the evil approach? And what does evil mean to you? Because I think both good and evil is subjective depending on other outside influences. So I do think, now that I think about it and looking at the player's handbook, it's not as clear cut as it makes it out. And creating stories with these rich, complicated characters, we can't just say, well, that's good, well, that's evil. It depends on all these contexts.
I think a lot of it is separating out the differences between your character's alignment and the infernal bond that happened generations ago. The fact that there is some sort of pact of Asmodeus that happened beyond your control, yes, that influences the physical attributes of your character and how other people react to it, if that's, as a DM, the way you want to go. But it doesn't have any direct bearing on your alignment or how your character acts. That's the important distinction, I find, and one that the player's handbook doesn't make especially clear. It kind of hints at it, but it's not only now that we've sort of really started to sort of look through that, you're right. The fact that these people have that infernal heritage will give them problems in the same way that Aasimar have angelic bloodlines, and that affects them. And it's in the same way that dwarves look like dwarves and elves look like elves. But it doesn't necessarily have to define how your character reacts, who they are, their personality, and how you want to play them. Those are all very separate things.
Yeah.
As you say, you can have a tiefling that embraces their infernal heritage, and you can have one that strives to do good in everything they do because they are a constant reminder of the evil in the world to themselves. Maybe they don't even see it as an evil thing. Maybe it's like, actually, it's got nothing to do with me whatsoever, and I can't really question it, and it gives me these powers, so that's great.
For me, I guess when I run stories and stuff, I don't necessarily want to, as a DM perhaps, and maybe as a player, I see this as a way to escape everyday life. So when it says stuff like, oh, well, a character like this will be greeted with stares and whispers and possibly even violence and insult, I wouldn't wish that on anyone. But again, it is creating that culture. And like you said, all cultures have biases toward you. Like you said, like the elves and dwarves, they mistrust each other and stuff. But like to the point where it leads to violence, that's when I'm like, oh, I'm not so sure about it. So, but like with all these things, these can be rewritten. You can make it so that the tieflings are the majority or a main race and one of the others isn't, and I think it's just making sure that is put somewhere in a book, which I know it sounds very straightforward, but if it's an unwritten rule, people don't realize it's there and signposting it to it. But let's move on, because I guess I could go on for ages about this. But talking about the infernal bloodline, so it's like, what do tieflings like? What is their appearance? What is this imprint that they've had from this pact? So they look human still, but they have like clear sort of horns. So and what's quite cool is that it talks about appearance being that you can have the traditional sort of ram's horns which turn around. You have like gazelle horns, which I thought was really cool, like sort of pointed up. And you can have them big, small, or whatever. And I guess, again, there's that imagery. Again, you think devils, they have horns and stuff like that. So again, you associate it to ne'er-do-welling and evil stuff. They have a tail, which I kind of forgot about, because like, why would you use a tail? But canine teeth, the eyes are solid colours with no visible pupil, different coloured skin tones, which I think is quite nice, because then obviously that can refer to any kind of pact with any sort of devil, which I'm sure we'll go on to as well. But ultimately, it talks about sort of like, if we're using this sort of the culture of like you can't trust them, etc., going from the player's handbook, it talks about how they exist as small minorities. They are found in sort of human cities, but on the outskirts. They are sort of in the roughest of places. So you understand that they may be more likely to be from a criminal network or a swindler or crime lords in some way, because that is the world that they've grown up in. And it's like I said, what's interesting for me is that when I've watched streams of them, everyone who plays a tiefling is not like that at all. They play them as honorable monks who will fight for justice and free their people. They will play crafty musicians. They will play nature-loving druids. And that, to me, again, because of that disconnect from what I read and what I saw, I was like, well, why are people doing this? And I was like, now I'm like, well, obviously they do this because this is so sad. Like, why would you want to play a character that suffers all these injustices when you could change the story? So I just thought, again, I know I go on about Tasha's, but being able to change that sort of dynamic and play whatever you want with a tiefling is just great, really.
I have to say, now you mentioned it, the tail I always forget as well. It's just such a little thing, but not a little thing. It's a huge personality thing that I guess stands you apart as a character. And you're right. It's all of that stuff to do with the actual background of who this race is. As a DM, you have the choice to change that and to apply it in such a way that you want, so you can remove or change or add in detail on any of that sort of background. In terms of actually playing a tiefling then, so what sort of traits have they got that you've got to keep an eye out for?
So in terms of traits, obviously age, they're a bit like humans in a way, maybe last a bit longer as the humans just like die off. They have superior dark vision, so they can see in the dark 60 feet, which again makes sense, because anything with devilish heritage, can't say that in the morning, that will have like some sort of dark vision for that. Resistance to fire, so this is going off the sort of player's handbook one, which assumes the tiefling is from Asmodeus, that sort of lineage, I guess. But obviously we'll go into the fact that obviously with all the 9 archdevils, there's different resistances they can have and replace stuff with. They have this thing called legacy, infernal legacy. And again, it changes depending on which archdevil you are part of. But in the player's handbook, you've got thaumaturgy, hellish rebuke, and darkness. And those are the sort of spells you can get as a sort of innate spellcast you get at different levels. finally, you just go, what languages can you speak? Well, you can speak Common and Infernal, which might be useful depending on where you go. But again, with Tashes, you can switch that out. But that's pretty much it in terms of like the sort of cool things you get as Tieflings. I mean, Dark Vision is always really good. It's always helpful. Resistance to Fire is a good one early on, I think, because obviously if you're fighting dragons or there's explosions nearby, halving that's pretty good as well.
Absolutely, and it's one of those things. Resistance is you forget how useful it can be until you're fighting, the dragon, and you're like, oh no, hang on, this is good. I'm cool with this. This is fantastic. I think traditionally they were seen as being very good sorcerers, bards, paladins, anything that involves having a little bit of charisma. Although again, stats these days can be changed a lot and tweaked as you want. But yeah, they were definitely seen as a face player. So somebody that wants to be upfront and doing a lot of role playing or a lot of interacting with NPCs and the environment, because charisma is a very utilized skill. Having some intelligence works as well. Not many, actually, really at all races have intelligence as a boost. So unusual of that one. It's worth pointing out again, because I mean, we've had sessions on this and it's a difficult one to remember sometimes, but devils and demons in D&D are two very different things. And this is definitely the devil lineage. So when we talk about things like hellish resistance and infernal legacies, this is to do with the 9 hells and with Asmodeus rather than demons and demon lords like Gratz and all of the other ones. And it is worth keeping that in mind, because as I say, there are now variations of Tieflings and the abilities that you can have with them, which I guess is sort of what we're going to have a look at next. And it's all to do with the different layers of hell. I would, as a little bit of a narration point, if you don't know about the layers of hell, we've actually done a session on the hell generally. And I think we've done another session on Zariel, who's one of the the greater devils, devil lords. I forget what the sort of official title of them is. Maybe I need to go back and watch that or listen to that podcast again, as I've just totally forgotten myself. But what other different Tieflings can we have?
Yeah, exactly what you said. Obviously, you have the sort of 9 archdevil or devil lords of each layer of hell. Zariel will be the one people will probably recognize the most, because obviously there's a whole dedicated adventure to Zariel's level of Avernus, so Descent into Avernus. And reading it again, because it's very short and pithy, each of these sort of descriptions, that if you are a Tiefling of this lineage, and all that changes really is the legacy stuff, that you just change like what spells you know at different levels and stuff, and gives you sort of insight into like, well, these again, typically if you are formed from this pact, you're good at these things. So for example, in Zariel, it says you are stronger and receive magical abilities that help aid you in battle. So for that, you get Thaumaturgy. Everyone loves a good Thaumaturgy. Searing Smite and Branding Smite. So again, stuff that will power you up when you attack. Other ones, again, to remind people, we've got Dispater. I will say I've forgotten how to pronounce all of these things because it's been so long. So forgive me if I say them wrong.
Dispater? I don't actually know. It's one of those, isn't it?
It's one of those. So Dispater is all about secrets and sharing them with the highest bidder. So anyone from that lineage will maybe be good at spying or infiltrating something. And for that, again, their legacy is that you get Thaumaturgy, Disguise Self, and Detect Faults, which again could be very useful if you're building sort of a character who is as from a spy network or is just generally like a charlatan is what I'm thinking from a background, which again, some of the stuff that they've talked about is that when you're doing a quick build, certainly with Tiefling, sometimes they go, oh, and charlatan, which again is not necessarily what you might want to do, but again, it is interesting to see how it's written like that. The other one that came to mind was Levistus, who is, again, you might remember this. So Levistus is entombed on like an ice glacier of some sort on a layer of hell. And they're known for offering bargains to people who can't escape a certain doom or destiny, which I always loved as sort of a, you can't get out of this, but I can help you. And you wonder if the consequence of that offer is worse than death itself, which I just thought was great. For their legacy, you get Ray of Frost and Armor of Agathis. And Armor of Agathis is one of those ones, again, Critical Role uses it quite a bit, where it's just this really cool effect. And I when I see it, I was like, oh, yeah, I'd like that. Which doesn't necessarily justify escaping my doom for a certain death, but I just thought that was really cool.
Yeah, there's a Tiefling for every type of devil, really. And as I say, it's all about creating that thematic link between the bloodline and the heritage of your tiefling and the abilities it's got, but none of these affect how you play your tiefling. It's always worth keeping that in mind. Or, the fact that your tiefling stems from Levistus doesn't necessarily mean that they have to always enjoy the cold and want to entomb people and offer people bargains and all of that stuff. They can still be whoever they want. They can shun their heritage. They can you can play your character as you would like. It's just they're very interesting little tweaks on the spells you get and the abilities you get. It's worth pointing out as well that only 2 actual things change between the tiefling as written in the Player's Handbook and the tieflings written in Mordenkainen's Tome. It's only the ability score increases and the infernal legacies. So even if you are a tiefling that is part of Levistus, as the book is written, you still have resistance to fire, not to ice. It's worth keeping that in mind. Although, again, with conversations with your DM, you might be able to change those resistances accordingly. I know that, for instance, Critical Role did that with one of the tieflings in the group before this book came out. They made her into a sort of frost tiefling with resistances to frost and using ice-based damage with the Hellish Rebuke. So that was a tweak that happened before these sort of tweaks were a thing. So there's all kinds of customization that you can do. I think as I'm looking at it, it seems like the book wants to continue the charisma +2. That doesn't really seem to go anywhere. It's just other little sort of sub traits. And I mean, some of these are really, really cool. It's well worth going through the sections about the Blood War and about generally the layers of hell and how these things work, because it's just, the lore here is thick and interesting and absolutely mad, I find.
I agree. Like it's again, that sort of thing where getting information, getting these story hooks about this is how your character came to be, doesn't have to say how you play that character, but just that little history. It's, I guess for a DM, maybe more than a player, I'm not sure. But I just love having that knowledge and learning about these things and like just being, how can I twist it into my own story, perhaps? But just to also say as well, if none of these tiefling, the heritages really catch your eye or like, I'm not so sure, there is a variant tiefling, which, it does say that not all tieflings come from Amodius. I can't even say Amodius now. You can have different things. And what it does is that it talks about like, well, if you want to change your appearance, you can do a roll 1d4 +1, and you can choose from stuff like small horns, fangs, forked tongue, cat-like eyes, 6 fingers on each hand, goat-like legs, cloven hooves, a forked tail, etc., etc., etc. And you can change that look about you if you just want to have certain things. But then it says to replace the infernal legacy, you can choose one of the following options. You have Devil's Tongue, which allows you to get like vicious mockery, charm person, and enthrall. You could have Hellfire. It replaces Hellish Rebuke, essentially. You don't have to shout it out loud. And then a very interesting one that just says Winged. And it says that you get bat-like wings and a flying speed of 30 feet when you're not wearing heavy armor. And I was like, hang on, why doesn't everyone be a variant tiefling and get the ability to fly at level 1? Like it just replaces something else. But the fact you get a flying speed straight away, and only if you're not wearing heavy armor, but still, I was like, that's a game changer for me as a DM, because suddenly like, oh great, they're now flying.
I think is that actually better than Aarakocra? I'm just trying to remind myself with them. I think they can be wearing light armor and still fly, but medium not so much. So that's an interesting one.
But so again, there's so many options to like if you want to do it. But again, for me, it's always been like, why are you playing this character? What is your expectation? Is it because tieflings have been traditionally evil and I want to play an evil character? And then obviously I would say, well, you could do that with any race. Or is it something like, actually, I want to, explore this sort of heritage a bit. I want to explore, this mistrust thing and how I would deal with it as a character. And again, as long as all the other players are happy with it, that this is something that wishes to be explored. Because some people, again, like I said, might just want to be like, I just want to fight the monster and get home and save the town. Again, it's just setting that expectation up front with being an evil character. And it's just interesting for me because obviously tieflings but in my head were always linked to evil because of the way it was in the player's handbook. And hopefully going forward, not so much anymore, and that any race could be evil. That's my motto now. Any race can be evil.
Exactly. Well, it's interesting that we took this as a topic, because behind the scenes, we're currently preparing to start a Curse of Strahd campaign under the DM-ship of Fee, which I'm looking forward to hugely. I get to play a character and sort of enjoy that. But I've been thinking about creating my character for this, and I decided to go with a tiefling of Zariel. And it's interesting in the sense that you think about this in exactly the way we're talking about. You've got this link to an infernal legacy that gives you powers, gives you an appearance, but how you choose to react to that is totally your own. So I decided to think, well, Zariel is the fallen angel of battle, of flames, of swords, and of vanquishing. So I'm playing a tiefling who has those skills. So, like gets a little bit more strength and gets a little bit more charisma and has a couple of smiting spells and has that trait to him that innately he is designed to be somebody who can pick up a sword and smite and vanquish. But my character is going to realize that, and from an early age goes, no, that's not for me. I don't want that at all. And so carved a life out as essentially a sort of local priest, effectively going around and, trying to bless people and generally being a sort of village, like good person, seeing this legacy and then going, no, that's not who I want to be. And sort of not fighting against it, but just like, this doesn't define me. I don't have to be this person. I'm going to use these skills. But ultimately, if I still want to be a good person, I'll channel this ability and I'll try and, put a positive slant on it. So yeah, interesting.
And then just going from the opposite side of that. So from my point of view, reading Curse of Strahd, obviously Barovia itself is a demiplane where the locals have not seen or heard of, all these different kinds of races. So it says in the book quite clearly is that anyone that does not fit the necessary, we don't recognize it, are faced with mistrust. And that's not just for tieflings, that's could be for any races that are seen as different. Because they've lived under this rule of fear, it's going to be very interesting for me to play it. Like I've said to everyone that they can play whatever they want, apart from anything that can fly, as my one rule. And it's been interesting having these conversations as people wanting to play different races. Because then again, in my head, it's like, well, why would you want to do that? But then trying to go like, okay, forget that. What will happen in this particular thing? What does the book say? Do I want to change from that? Do I want to tweak with it a bit? So it's been interesting from that point of view, because like you said, you're thinking of tiefling. There's been talks about Aasimars or Aasimars. One person's thinking of being a shifter. So it's all these different things, which these are really interesting characters and way to explore them. But it's like put them into this world which has certain set hierarchy or set sort of assumptions. It's going to be really interesting to play. I'm really, really looking forward to it.
Yeah, it'll be fantastic. We mentioned them a few times now, Aasimar being the other side to the coin. So do you want to give us a little bit of background about what they are and what they're about?
I will. So Aasimars are, compared to tieflings, they're seen as like people who have souls that are touched by the light of heaven, which sounds so much better than godchildren. I don't know. It just feels like, well, think about it. Obviously, devil children, and that's devil spawn. But then these people are like, oh, well, they've got goodness in them, and that's what it's described. They are descended from humans that have had a touch of power from the Mount Celestia even. Whereas before, it sounded like, oh, well, tieflings are made from this pact and a sort of out of wedlock sort of thing. Here, it's like, well, it's a good thing. This is a really good thing that, these people have come to save us. They're sort of defined or written about in Volo's Guide to Monsters as if they are celestial champions. They are seen as they are going to be guardians of good and law. They're expected to strike down evil, and lead by example. And I think that's the key thing here, is leading by example and being judge, jury, and executioner in a way. These are the avengers or the avatars of justice. I think that's fascinating how we put so much pressure on one kind of heritage and then flip it to the other side, when easily you can see, oh, this has definitely got room for interpretation for going wrong or not being as expected. Because whenever someone puts that pressure on you to be where you're going to succeed and you're going to smite evil and stuff, what's to stop people going, no, I'm good. I actually want to explore stuff, or there's more purpose to life than just, sticking on the straight and narrow. There's discovering and meeting people changes your worldview, and being good or being evil is not the black and white issue that we think. So yeah, for me, it's just fascinating to see how it was written. But then there was definitely more of a paragraph saying, well, of course, there are such things as fallen Aasimars. Whereas obviously in Tieflings, it said, well, obviously there are good Tieflings, but at the same time, most tend to be evil. So it was just a really interesting balance for reading about them.
Again, treading that balance between these are influenced by good, but they don't necessarily have to be good. In the same way that a Tiefling can fight against their infernal heritage and decide to try and be as good as they can. This describes, that gift of Mount Celestia being almost a thorn in some Aasimars' side, that constant expectation that they're supposed to be good and that people love them and greet them with open arms. And they're just thinking, no, I don't want this. I want to be that evil person. I want to do things, and they fight against it. So the actual character and how you play it is totally up to you. I think there's some really interesting sort of ways of playing that, where is an Aasimars' fallen nature actually part of who they are and choices they've made, or is it something that was given to them, like the fact that they are an Aasimar in the first place? Did they fight against it? Did they try for redemption, or is it not of interest to them? It's an interesting sort of like a sort of mix between. But mechanically, anything interesting to pick up about Aasimar?
So again, they can see well good in the dark, superior dark vision, that's always good. They have celestial resistance, so resistance to necrotic and radiant damage, which makes sense in a way. Again, compared to Tieflings, it's like, they get against like a general sort of fire one, whereas necrotic and radiant, you're probably going up against more, not superior monsters, but more complex monsters that can do this, or more otherworldly monsters, I would say, or creatures. Healing hands, so it's basically, what's it called that paladins do now? The
lay on hands.
Lay on hands. Wow, hang on, error. So you can regain a number of hit points equal to your level once per long rest. So obviously, you can bit that out. You can use the light cantrip, and language is common and celestial, which makes sense. But the one thing I found really interesting is that one of the things that make Aasimars who they are, so like we talked about, the thing that connects sort of like Tieflings and Aasimars is that there's a secrecy to them, whereas Tieflings, they have to hide, so per se. Aasimars also have to do the same thing, because they're, like you said, they're seen as good everywhere, so they'll have like hoods or shielded helms, etc. But the one thing I really loved about Aasimars is this idea of an Aasimar guide. Every Aasimar will have a link to an angelic being who provides guidance in some way, or sort of as a mentor character, because in a way, if they have the touch of goodness from Mount Celestia, that's kind of a big deal. So presumably those up top want to just keep a tab on it, just in case something does go wrong, perhaps. And this angelic being, this guide, can only communicate through dreams, which is always a lovely thing for the DM to be like, okay, so everyone's having a long rest. Right. I'm going to talk to you for 20 minutes about something you did wrong. Let's
go through your day. Let's have a think about what you've done, and we'll learn some action points. No, I don't want to keep talking to you. I've just murdered someone.
And that's the thing. So again, D&D loves their tables. So you've got names for them that you could use, but also the nature of a guide. So you've got like bookish and lecturing, you've got compassionate and hopeful, kind and parental, stern and judgmental. Again, it's that sort of thing where it's like reporting back in. We talked about guilds in the previous episode, that thing where you have a contact, but this person can come at you at any time and say, what was that? It was almost like a parents' evening in my head. But I guess the key thing to remember is that with angelic guides, Aasimar guides, is that they're not omniscient. They'll know stuff. And if you fought against a certain creature or monster, they might have some help in that, but they can't tell you what's going to happen or what has happened. And maybe they'll, depending on their nature, keep secrets from you because they want you to do the right thing. So again, in my head, I have this really cool thing where in the sense of there is an agenda from Mount Celestia, and they're putting you to do it, but you might not want to do it. Or if you knew about it in its full entirety, you might be like, that's not good. For example, it talks about you're going past a village that needs saving, but the angelic guide says, no, you need to keep going because there's a bigger evil up ahead. Don't bother with this village. And having that tension, having that thing, again, the same thing with the guilds, that do you guilt someone into doing that? Like, I love stuff like that where you give them a choice, and all choices are valid. But you pick one, you go, okay, that part of the story is now gone from you. And it's that sudden fear you see in players' eyes going, oh, I could have done something. It's like maybe it has consequences, maybe it doesn't. And yeah, I just thought that as a really cool sort of storytelling element where you can just give them the choice. Because you've been told by someone technically in a white coat that you need to do one thing. Like, do you follow what your guide says? So
yeah, what is your guide's true motivation? As a DM, that's a fantastic role-playing aspect to be. As you say, there's that choice of fighting the greater good, but maybe I think the book describes it as, the Deva or celestial being resides in a plane of absolute law and good, and may not actually understand the choices that you're making on the mortal realm. So, these standards they hold you to may be inflexible. And that might be one of the reasons that you are fighting against them so hard, because you don't quite understand why they're choosing to be like that, and they don't get you, and they don't get the choices you're making, and there's a sort of butting of heads to do with that. So it's it's all kinds of fantastic role-playing opportunities. The book gives us 3 different types of Aasimar as well. I think 2 of them are kind of similar and one is a little bit different, but what sort of stuff can you do?
The 2 sort of you're referring to, the 2 very similar ones, which I call good and then too much good, is the Protector Aasimar and the Scourge Aasimar. Protector Aasimar, I think, is what people would associate when you think of an angelic being or an angel in human form. They are charged typically by the powers of good to guard the weak, to strike at evil whenever it stands, and to stand vigilant against the dark. Sort of like, again, very paladin-esque, sort of like, here is your duty, you have to take part in it. The sort of thing that you sort of the racial or sort of the inherited thing that you get with this is something called Radiant Soul. And it describes it as having incorporeal wings, and you get the flight speed of 30 feet for a minute. So you could flap around the battlefield briefly, which I was like, okay, that's not too bad, because that's like once per big combat per se. Yeah. And it deals extra radiant damage at your level. I think that's pretty good. You can easily just, as I tend to do when I play Aubrey, is like, get the wings out, hit hard, done. That's the first round. Is like, okay, now to work on the rest of it. So yeah, there's just something about that. It feels like very Flying Avenger-esque type thing for that. So yeah. Then you have 2 good Aasimar.
Too much good to give.
Too much good to give. It's the Scourge Aasimar. So it's described as, this person is imbued with the divine energy that blazes intently within them and feeds a powerful desire to destroy. It is at best unflinching, but at its worst all-consuming. And in my head, I picture Scott Summers, Cyclops from X-Men. The fact that this person, and he talks about that basically when you use your, radiant, it's not radiant consumption. Thank you, autocorrect. What is radiant consumption? Never mind. Causes a searing light to radiate from you, pouring out of your eyes and mouth, threatening to char you. So it's just it's almost uncontrollable, all
melting.
Coming out. Oh.
Normally you associate that with some sort of evil demigod, don't you?
Yes.
White hot mouth and flames coming from them.
So often they wear masks to hide this feature, because again, it's that sort of thing. So I've been thinking almost like a visor, either Cyclops style or Geordie from Star Trek. So with this, you shed a bright light, which is always useful. On each of your turns, you and each creature takes radiant damage equal to half your level rounded down. So the fact that when you use this ability, it hurts you and every creature. You can't pick who it hurts. It's just it's pretty much a Hail Mary, essentially. You have to rush in and explode. And I love that as a sort of a vision sort of thing. But the fact it can hurt you, and obviously at lower levels, you're like, oh, you might go down. So if you just suddenly overburn yourself, etc. It's just something about it is just amazingly cool. But in my head as well, it's like, well, this is what happens when it's too much good, too much things that it just burns you from the inside. And it's oh, such a powerful image.
It's really, really cool. Mechanically, it's worth pointing out that you actually take half the damage yourself because you are resistant to radiant energy. But equally, I mean, there was this image that I was thinking of with sort of Curse of Strahd, where, say, a vampire were to sort of pick you up and start going, I'm going to bite your neck now. And you go on then, and then just burst into light. And they're like, okay, do I drop this thing or do I not? This hurts now. I love that sort of image of uncontrollably being able to not stop it. I quite enjoy that. It is cool. Like, yeah, what happens if you fall unconscious because of your own radiant damage? Like, what does that look like? What mechanically does that feel like?
Yeah, it's that idea, like almost like Rogue S from X-Men, like it just burns you from the inside, like just getting all this power. Is like, can you control it? And again, that's a really cool sort of story element if you wanted to go with that. But as you said, we've got the good, we've got the too good, and then we've got less good.
Yeah, the
fallen. So yeah, of course, there's that point where and I think it made a really good point earlier on in this sort of description of it. It talks about conflicted souls. So throughout their whole life, Aasimars are told, like, well, you have to be good, you have to do this, you have to do this. It's for the good of everyone, the greater good, as I like to, the greater good. There's a point where it says some people turn away from it and even turn to evil because they see this as brainwashing. And I just thought that sentence, that sort of line, was such a cool concept. Again, talking about this, having hidden agendas, holding things away as the guide away from your Aasimar player. They'd be like, well, hang on, why didn't you tell me? Why don't you trust me? And then you have that whole sort of like idea of like Lucifer falling from heaven, that sort of, there's also those connotations from that. But like, I like that idea. It's like, actually, what this hidden agenda, it's not fulfilling the good that I see in the world or what I want in the world. So I'm going to turn away. And this is all they're saying is brainwashing. It's like, yeah, almost cult-like in a way, I guess. And yeah, just that's so different. Because again, that sort of image, like, well, power of gods, it's all for the greater good and stuff like that. But actually, it's the same reasoning people would say that if you're a part of a cult. And yet you don't necessarily see that because you think, oh, well, Tieflings are the ones that have this, and they're the ones with the cults bringing back ancient gods and stuff. So yeah, having this idea that they're turning away from good. It says in the Fallen Aasimar thing, you're touched by dark powers as youth or turn to evil in early adulthood, whose inner light has been replaced by a shadow. Whoa. Oh,
I know. Not so Aasimar anymore, are you?
Absolutely. Yeah, and for this, your sort of special inheritant feature is Necrotic Shroud. So this time you have 2 skeletal, ghostly, flightless wings. So you can't fly, but you look bloody badass as you do it. And then people become frightened of you until the end of your next turn. So again, just having that starting off, like again, if you're playing the big bad or if you're the anti-hero, perhaps using that sort of first move, just like, I have wings, come at me, even though you can't fly. Again, I can just imagine if you had like a Protector Aasimar and a Fallen Aasimar fighting, is that sort of, evil and good, sort of fight, all those imageries there. And then you get, for the extra minute, you get the extra necrotic damage when you attack equal to your level. So yeah, it's, again, just a flip of what the Protector Aasimar is, but again, for me, it's just the image of it that's so cool.
Oh, it's awesome. No, I absolutely love it. It's really, really, really cool. And again, gives you fantastic role-playing opportunities as to whether or not that fallen aspect was something your character willingly achieved, unwillingly achieved, or was given to them inherently, and whether they're fighting against it or not, or what does their Deva look like? Have they still got a Deva trying to save them as an angelic guide, or has that disappeared and now there's a void? Maybe there was a guide throughout their lives and it just stopped. After a while, like what happened?
To me, I get real big vibes of like Good Omens, that sort of thing where you have the cool talking one who was originally an angel, and then you have the angel that talk, and they have to work together to fulfill a prophecy. So that in my head would be a really cool one-shot S type thing, and anything to do with Terry Pratchett and Neil Gaiman, just putting that into a world and making it less maybe about good and evil, like the big players, as it were, reducing it down to the people themselves and the relationships between those two, but with all this backstory and this all, I guess, baggage of what to think about. So yeah, that is, for me, it's actually really, really interesting to see that in a book, I guess.
I mean, out of all of these things, is there anyone that you think you might want to give a try to playing, like Aasimar or Tiefling? Anything really sort of does it for you?
That is a very, very good question, because I, as you know, I don't play I don't play races outside my comfort zone. I guess, well, I have played an Aasimar. I played an Aasimar Rogue at level 20 very recently for a game of Pantheon. My God, level 20 is terrifying when you jump into it. But it's it was really interesting about like all the stuff you can and can't do. And I think it was just a general Protector Aasimar when I think about it, because it seems very straightforward in what you can do. I feel like the Scourge one, there's a tendency to burn brightly and then burn out. It could be cool for role-playing things, but again, maybe it's just a one-shot S that you are facing the good and evil. I think if it was a long-term campaign, I think either Protector Aasimar or just a variant Tiefling to be honest with you, just to try it out. And I love the idea of trying out like Hellfire, so having burning hands, actually doing damage rather than Hellish Rebuke, which is, I know, is a reaction rather than an attack. So yeah, any of those sort of variant Tiefling or a Protector Aasimar for sure.
Yeah, definitely. I could play. Oh, Aasimars sound really cool. I'm really looking forward to playing it as Ariel Tiefling. I must say, there's that element of like fighting against one's heritage. I'm looking forward to sort of giving it a go.
Nice.
I just think, especially when you mix it together with the changes in Tasha about whether or not you want to play your character as straightly written in the book, it's good fun. You've got lots of opportunities here to really change things as you want and have a go in sort of different ways. So yeah, I think there's some really good races here. It's a good topic.
Ryan, is there anything you'd like to plug? Anything you're up to? Like, what's new with you, man?
My phone is currently charging, so I've already plugged it, which is quite good.
Very good.
Haha, jokes. Come and find me on Discord, UrsaRyan Discord. You can come and talk to me about D&D and other sort of things like that. What are you up to?
What am I up to? I'm being assaulted by your dad jokes. I am really
peppered by them, you could say.
My name's Fiona. I run the What Am I Rolling podcast, a twice monthly RPG one-shot podcast. And as always, it's going very well. What is there to talk about? I got asked to be on a Warhammer stream, another Warhammer stream, because they liked me so much last time. They want me back for more. Which
Are you
is
enjoying Warhammer? It's an interesting experience, I thought.
You know what? It's all right. It's for me, when I see a character sheet, I've said this 1,000 times before, when I see a character sheet which buffers, and there's a lot, and your health is on the second page, not the first, I'm like, oh, I need to really concentrate on this. But it sounds fun. Like, again, the idea that you are playing low level, like what I say, commoners, you're not part of the big battles, it's like the small things. It's definitely, I guess the ideal you think of it is like, oh, you're going to play Space Marines, you're going to do this. When in actual fact, it's more like Red Dwarf mixed with a bit of Blackadder. There's a lot of, again, that weird sort of bit where it's all admin and there's all this like, are you talking about heresy? No, I'm not talking about. Are you talking about heresy? Like that sort of simple entendre. Like I was like, oh, this is the kind of comedy I'm here for. So yeah, that I'm looking forward to. Also, again, exciting news in the fact that we have an offer code now for a local friendly game shop in Burnley, Third Space Gaming. I'll get the name right one day. Where if you use the offer code DMBC, you get 10% off your first order there, and that can be on anything. So if you really enjoy like Volo's Guide to Monsters, they've got the new D&D books like Candlekeep Mysteries and the new Van Richten Guide to Ravenloft. There you go. Feel free to buy from there.
Fantastic. Wow, what an episode. What a ride. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and we will see you all next time. Goodbye.
Bye.